Hi, I'm Nick Muir. Jamming already. Hello, I'm Nick Muir, and you're listening to the House Culture Podcast.
House Culture.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the House Culture Podcast. I'm your host and managing editor at House Culture, Matt Rouse. Thanks for joining us, streaming or downloading, but most importantly, listening. You should know the drill by now, but if this is your first time tuning in, where have you been? We at House Culture are a collective of house music fans who have come together through their mutual love of the beat to celebrate the spirit of house music. You can get your daily fix of all things house culture on our Instagram feed at houseculturenet, but as you can see with this podcast, we've already built up a hefty back catalogue of interviews with iconic characters from the scene, who've all been happy to sit down for a candid chat to tell us how this thing called house music has shaped their life. In this episode, we chat with Nick Muir, a titan of the progressive house genre, and also one half of Bedrock, alongside a guy called John Digweed. As you'll hear in this podcast, Nick's approach to production comes from a place of deep knowledge.
Because I have been trained and I have been schooled in it and I can do various things, it's kind of more interesting to me to do something which is out of that realm, really.
He had some real epiphanies once he discovered dance music.
I remember going out to some of the early parties, and what occurred to me about the music was the fact that it was going straight from the head of the guy who'd produced it out of the speakers.
What it was like hearing his own track feature in an iconic 90s film.
When they told us that it was going to be used in a film and that it was a British film, we didn't set very much store by that. But of course, it turned out to be Trainspotting.
And the secrets behind the creation of one of Bedrock's most recognisable tunes.
Heaven Sent's got that big tune, that big melody in it, and I remember layering it with different sounds and sampling that and then putting another synth on top of that and then just making it sound as big as I possibly could. I remember John saying, it's bigger than For an Angel.
So, turn it up and get ready to spend the next hour or so in the studio with Nick Muir.
House Culture.
Hi Nick, thanks so much for inviting us, House Culture, into your studio to do this podcast. It's much appreciated. Obviously you're a very talented producer and DJ in the world of dance music and progressive house. Obviously. But before all of that happened for you, how and where did your passion for music first come from?
Oh, it's a long history now, Matt. I've been playing music for all my life, really. We had a piano at home, and when I was 3, 4, I started going there and picking out chords. And my mum, who was a trained singer, she recognised that I was drawn to this and was able to pick out stuff from a young age, so she got me started on lessons when I was 5, and so I did that whole thing.
Yeah,
I did the classical training thing, all the grades up piano, and then what happens when you're about 15, 16, you start to get interested in other things, I did anyway. I was exposed to a lot of music. I've got 2 elder brothers, one's 12 years older and the other's 10 years older, and they were bringing stuff home. My elder brother was a big Beatles fan, and the middle brother of the 3 of us, he was more into soul music and that kind of thing, but they were both pretty into it, so I was getting, from being a tiny boy, I was getting all this music being played all the time, and I was interested anyway, so I was just getting exposed to a lot of music at a very young age. And when I got to my teens, then I was really obsessed by musical instruments, really. I remember I had the Bell's guitar catalogue, which I used to take to school and just look at while I was supposed to be listening to the geography lesson. I'd have that underneath the desk, deciding which guitar I was going to have, which amp would go with which guitar. My brother had a band as well when I was like 5 or 6, and they used to rehearse in our front room, and this for me was like absolute, it was magical, totally magical, the sparkly drum kit and the bass guitar with the long neck, and I remember being completely entranced by the whole thing. And so when I was in my mid-teens, I started playing guitar and bass, and started playing in bands when I was at school, and so that's how it all started.
You're playing all of the instruments. Which one in particular was the one you were more leaning towards at that time?
When I started playing bands when I was 16, I was playing the bass, as it goes. I always played guitar. I got my first guitar when I was about 8 or 9, and I can kind of play the guitar, but I don't know, I never felt as confident on it as I did the piano, because I'd been brought up playing the piano, but I was playing bass in bands. I mean, I couldn't afford keyboards, so I suppose I might have done that if I could afford to buy myself a little electric piano or something. But somebody needed a bass player, and I figured it wouldn't be too hard to play the bass, so I went and got one and started playing, and had a great time, and played bass quite a lot actually until when I was in college. I did music at university, at Cardiff. It was like a theoretical and history music degree, that type of thing, rather than performing. But I always had my bass, my Fender bass, and played in bands all the way through college.
And that led to you wanting a career in music?
I never really thought about it, to be honest. I mean, when I was at college, I remember wandering around most of the time completely out of my head, actually. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
It's fine.
But I got through the degree, passed it, and then it was kind of a bit of a shock to me when that all came. I was totally unprepared. I thought, oh, okay, that's all finished now. I'm supposed to go and make a living, am I? So didn't really know what to do. So I moved up when I left college when I was 21. Moved up to London, and I got a job with a music publisher, United Artists. I worked for them for 6 months in the office there. I mean, it's office work. Okay, it's to do with music, but it was indistinguishable from any other office job as far as I can tell. While I was there, I applied to go get into the BBC. They used to run a course called the Assistant Studio Manager's Course for Graduates, and I did all right. I got past the first interview, but then they give you something they call a board, which is in front of 5 people, where they ask you slightly more in-depth questions. I was completely unprepared for that. I had nobody. If somebody had given me some kind of heads up as to what I was supposed to do in that interview, or the fields that I should have covered, I think they probably would have taken me, because I could tell the guy who initially interviewed me thought I was okay. But I didn't get in there, and basically when that happened, I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to see if I can pick up some work playing around, because we'd moved up to London. I lived in Hereford in the West Country. I moved there when I was 14. My parents moved out. Anyway, my mate of mine and we moved back up to London. I worked for this music publisher for 6 months, and after that, as I say, I started just doing auditions, and used to buy the Melody Maker and look in the back of there and see anybody who was looking for somebody to play. I hooked up with a bunch of people that I knew from college, friends of friends, and we were playing in pubs and that kind of thing, like working men's clubs. Terrible music, but we were gigging. And so when I eventually, as I say, I didn't get into the BBC, then I first proper gig I had was with a guy called Jake Burns. There was this punk band called Stiff Little Fingers back in they were late 70s, early 80s. And he split Stiff Little Fingers, and they started a band called Jake Burns and the Big Wheel, put an advert in Melody Maker. I went and auditioned, and they said, okay, you're in. So that was a 4-piece band, me and Jake and the drummer and bass player. And we did a tour, and we did a session, Maida Vale, for John Peel, I remember. And what happened to that was they couldn't agree terms with the record company. I guess it was, they were after they just couldn't figure a deal out between them, really. And so when they told me that they weren't going to, they were going to suspend manoeuvres for 6 months, I just thought, no, what am I going to do for 6 months? This was like May, and they said, well, we're going to start again and see what we can do in September. But I kind of knew that it was, it just had the feeling that it wasn't quite going to work. So, oh man, I did all sorts of crazy things. I phoned up completely out of the blue. I phoned up somebody I'd met who was an agent, and I said, who's looking for a piano player? And they said, well, how did you know about this? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, well, there's this French guy, Johnny Halliday, like rock and roll. He's looking for a piano player, and he's over in London on Monday. Go down.
No way.
So I went down there, again, did the audition. Thing is, I could play pretty well, and I did this thing where I would learn the first 16 or 32 bars of really difficult classical pieces. And so when they asked me, well, can you play classical? I'd just sort of rip out a bit of the Chopin's Revolutionary Study or something.
Yeah.
Of course, I couldn't play it all the way through. It would have been taking me years.
Yeah.
but I could get the first 32 bars down, and they kind of go, oh wow, okay, fine, we'll have you.
Amazing.
So I went over to France and did a tour with Johnny. We played in Paris for 6 months. How long was it actually? 3 months residency at this venue in Paris called the Zenith, which is like, it's sort of Wembley Arena size, but he was such a big star that he could play. He played 3 months, 6 nights a week at 8,000 seater venue.
Wow.
Mad, really. And I was only, like I said, I was only 23, 24.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought, oh, this is good.
This is it.
This is how life is then. But anyway, that was really brilliant, and I made some good friends over there, and I enjoyed working in France and living the French lifestyle. So excellent fun.
And what year was that?
That would have been 84, 85.
Yeah.
So we did that 3 months in the Zenith, and then we did another 3 month tour around France. And then I came back from there, came back to London, and I started at that point to try and write a bit more. You see, of course, we didn't have, computers weren't in general use at that point.
Yeah.
So what you did was you went and did demos in 8-track studios with people. You wrote your thing, and I worked with a couple of singers and tried to, just get something going, and got a bit more used to working in a studio. At the same time, what I was doing was playing piano every lunchtime at Langan's Brasserie, which is up in Mayfair. Again, that was one of those things. I rang, I thought to myself, how can I make a bit of extra money? I thought maybe I could play piano in a restaurant.
Yeah.
And so I thought, where would I like to play? And I thought Langan's Brasserie. And again, I rang them up. This doesn't happen to me now, but I rang them up and said, I hear you're looking for a piano player, cheeky as you like. And they said, how did you know we were looking for a piano player? And I'm like, oh, well, word gets round. So I went up and, I used to play there a couple of hours every lunchtime. So Monday through Friday. Ideal, really. It just meant that I could keep myself ticking over while I tried to write some bits of material.
So you're living the life of a lounge room lizard almost in Mayfair. And does this lead to kind of a life as a session musician?
That's sort of what happened. The guy who produced our initial recordings for Jake Burns' band is a bloke called John Porter, and John was he had a big influence on me. He was a fairly major figure. He produced the Smiths' first couple of albums. He'd played with he'd been in Roxy Music, and he'd played in Eric Clapton's band and played with Steely Dan, and he was a dude, still is. I haven't seen him for years. He had a big influence on me, and I remember it was the dope smoking that got me. It was like smoking dope at that point was part of the job description, and I can remember turning up to the studio with John and his engineer Kenny, and the first thing they would do would roll a massive cone, and get absolutely, well, they seemed to be able to function okay, but that's just how they worked. They would get stoned and they would record the band, and of course I was quite, up for that really. And so that way of working and that attitude towards working, I mean, a lot of the music that you hear is your favourite music has been made under the influence of various different types of substance. So, like I say, it seemed to be a way of life to these people, so I enthusiastically joined in.
Why not?
But John was producing a band called Fire Next Time, who were signed to Polydor, which was the lead singer was a guy called James Maddox, and they Polydor had a lot invested in Fire Next Time, and I did a session for them which John called me in to do, and that worked really well, so I ended up joining that band, and we toured and made an album in Rockfield, and that was really good. They were kind of like Jim sang he was left-wing kind of agit pop type character. He was a big fan of Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, but did it in a slightly more British kind of a way. And so my role in that was piano and Hammond organ, and that's what I ended up doing quite a lot of sessions around London, playing the piano and the Hammond and that type of American type of sound. Bill Payne, Steve Naive, who was the keyboard player in the Elvis Costello and his Tractions, it's that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so I played with Fire Next Time, as they were called, for the album and a tour. Then what happened, on this timeline is that we supported a band called The Men They Couldn't Hang. And The Men They Couldn't Hang are a kind of folk punk. I think they called them cowpunk at the time. They were a funny sort of a band. Great band, I thought. And we were on the bill supporting them, their support band on the tour. We'd bought onto their tour. And I remember saying to them that I wouldn't mind joining their band. It's a bit cheeky, really, now I kind of think about it. But they seemed to be up for it. So I ended up leaving Fire next time and joining The Men They Couldn't Hang. And I made a couple of albums with them and toured. We toured around the world. And they were good friends. They were a really good laugh, It was excellent fun. And great band. I mean, they weren't flashy players or anything. And when I first joined them, I had no idea what to do. They figured they wanted a piano organ player, so I tried to fit in the best I can, but I didn't know what the hell was going on because they were totally unschooled. Yeah. And they would do weird things like the chorus would be in a totally different tempo to the verse. And at first I was thinking, well, they're making all these mistakes, but they weren't making mistakes. That's just how they did it. And as soon as I learned what they were doing, I kind of, okay, it does make sense after all. Loved that though, the fact that you have to kind of relearn what you're doing. They're not following any particular set of rules. Yeah. But it makes sense to them. Yeah. They're just playing together.
That's what makes it exciting as well, I suppose.
That's right, and different. And even though they're not schooled in any way, the fact is they all knew what they wanted to do, and they didn't talk about it ever, discuss it. They just played. Yeah. And because they had nobody telling them it was wrong, then they just made it right, which was a kind of a lesson to me, really. I like, as you say, that's what makes it exciting, and that's what makes the music have its own personality and gives it something which of its own and something which is organically arrived at. And that's been a recurring theme over the years. Yeah. Because I have been trained and I have been schooled in it and I can do various things, it's kind of more interesting to me to do something which is out of that realm, really.
I mean, yeah, having that training and that basis, I suppose, it helps you have that grounding and then explore the branches off of that, I suppose.
And also I was able to, because I'm an ear player more, I can read music, but I was never a fantastic reader. I'm more like an ear player. So if I hear something, if I know the tune of it, I can normally reproduce it and do it in various different styles. So I'm able to, if somebody's doing something and there's some kind of sense into it somewhere, I can normally figure out what it is. Mm. I've been a sideman, really. Yeah. That's kind of been my role throughout my career. To be a sideman, you need to be able to tune into what the people who are standing out in front of you are doing and give them the correct sort of support. And I figure I'm okay at that. Yeah. And I'm kind of still doing that with John, really. Yeah. It's, John has no musical, he's not a musician. John's a DJ. Yeah. And he's not particularly interested in the mechanics of music and how it works, but he knows what he likes. He knows what he wants. He's always had that vision. And so I've been able to help him realise it a bit in the productions that we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a nice lead-in, actually, I suppose. So you're kind of in this world where it's all bass guitar, piano, etc. Very analog, physical in that sense. Yeah. How did you first discover dance music, and what was your journey into that?
Well, you see, that was a very specific period of time. I was playing with the Men They Couldn't Hang, and I remember the engineer that we were working with, we were making some demos, said to me, "Nick, you're a keyboard player. Why don't you go and have a look at one of these keyboards that you can play 8 parts at once on?" And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? And he's told me about, it was a unit called the Roland D110, I remember. And you hook that up to your Atari computer via MIDI. And then on the sequencer, it's a cracked copy of Cubase. Everybody had a cracked copy of Cubase, about 1989. So I went and got myself a Roland D110 and an Atari computer and hooked it up. I'm like, oh, you're joking. This is amazing. What's going on? And I always really liked sequencing anyway, and I had a sequencer before, just a very basic QX Yamaha sequencer, which was like no power at all really, except for the fact that you could write a sequence on it and sync it to tape. And I'd done this once or twice in the mid-80s, but when the Atari came about and the boxes, the multi-timbral synthesizers like the D110, that just took it up a notch. And I realized I could program the drums and I could also program the bass and the keys, and it just made a lot of sense to me. I just loved the idea of being able to program the drums in particular, because one thing that John Porter said to me was that the thing about musicians who are doing what they do seriously is they have the sense of time. It's not the fact that they have this particular technical ability, although of course that comes into it, but if you're making rhythmic contemporary music, then if you've got that sense of time, then that is what's going to help you to make something which sounds authentic, legit. The phrasing of it you can get, and I figure I always had that feel, that sense of time. I kind of knew what he was talking about. So having the computer, which is really all about time, it's all about sequencing, locking everything in. As soon as I got my hands on that, I don't know, I felt, it felt like a bit of a homecoming, really.
Yeah.
Even though the technology was pretty new.
Yeah. And
the idea of being able to arrange the track, write the sequences, it was, a bit of a revelation, really.
Yeah.
So I started that, but I mean, I didn't necessarily know too much about, what was happening with acid house.
Yeah.
At the time, 88, 89, I kind of, you heard stuff about it. And I'd heard the music and I thought it sounded okay. I thought it sounded kind of to my ears, it sounded a little bit, basic, a bit kind of hard to describe, but it didn't particularly draw me in at first, because I thought it sounded so basic to me. Of course, I hadn't gone out and listened to it on acid at that point. So I wasn't quite getting the full effect. But I remember going, so I had this, rudimentary setup, the D110 and the Atari, and started getting another couple of bits. And still working sessions, and I was making an album with the Men They Couldn't Hang, and the producer was a guy called Pat Collier for that album. And Pat had success with the Wonder Stuff, and he had set himself up a studio by Old Street up in London called the Greenhouse. And what he was doing there was recording indie type bands, Jesus and Mary Chain, Primal Scream, that type of band, and Wonder Stuff as well, of course. But he had this whole premises, and he could see that I was keen, and so he said to me, look, I've got this studio up in London with a load of rooms, and I've bought all these samplers. Do you want to come up and hang out and see if you can make them work? So I was like, oh, yes. So I went up there and got myself a little space in his studio and got in front of the sampler, the S1000 Akai, with the Atari, and I moved over to Creator software, actually, which was another way of doing it. Do you remember Creator? It's a completely different way of doing it. Now they're all piano roll, which means you have a...
Oh, is it the one that goes down?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
that's right.
Yeah.
And you link patterns together.
Yes.
And I think back to it now, I have no idea how I made that work, but all those early tracks, early remixes with John, and early stuff that I did on my own was done on Creator. And making the sampler work, made my brain fry for about 2 months, getting my head around it, because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, really, but I managed to get my head around it.
Yeah. And
managed to make it do what I wanted to do.
So is this just messing around at this point, just seeing what the power of this stuff was, or
trying to learn what sampling was properly, and trying to delve into how you would manipulate samples to do what you wanted them to do, filter them up and down, loop stuff around at the end, just making a sampler do what you wanted to do, at the same time with a vague idea that there was some music happening along the lines of more technology-based music that was totally made on a computer and was for dancing. And that's about as much as I knew in 1989. Yeah. And then I started to try and get a bit closer. I remember going to, you remember the gardening club in Covent Garden? Yeah. I think it might even have been before, but anyway, that's where the gardening club was. And I remember going up there and hearing some music which was slightly different to acid house. It was like more Italian type house music, that early sort of like 1991, 90, kind of more richer harmonically and more musical sounding, and amazing, really. I was thinking, well, of course you can make music which has got more to it than just beats and acid lines. And I realised that there was something to be done in that area, and something that was very musical and but also really dynamic sounding. I mean, it was all new, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This was like the idea of putting that whacking great kick drum in. It was like something that had kind of sprung out of nowhere.
Yeah, and the sound systems as well, the physical sound systems to replicate that sound, to have it like thunder through your body.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a brilliant idea. Play records very loud through a sound system. And the other thing about it was I started going to parties then. I was living with the drummer from the Men They Couldn't Hang. We were living on this boat moored in just by Kew Bridge, and it was traveller times. Men They Couldn't Hang were a punk band really, and this whole traveller sound system thing had started up, and we were kind of living on the fringes of that a little bit. We were playing around London, and the boat, when we moved on there was no electricity or there was no running water or anything like that, so it was pretty basic lifestyle. And we knew people who were in that scene who were crossing over from the punk world, people who had been into that kind of ethic, that DIY ethic, but then they'd moved into this party scene, and they were all that was happening, and the illegal raves. Some of them were illegal, some of them weren't illegal. Nobody really knew what the status of them were. But, you'd go to these parties where people were just, getting trolleyed and listening to this music and soaking it up. And the authorities didn't really know what the hell was going on. And there was this, people knew that the authorities didn't know what was happening. And that was part of the buzz. It was reflected in the culture, the fact that, we were having this party and, having a great time. And the powers that be didn't really understand what was actually going on.
Yeah.
And they didn't really care at first. But of course the thing started to grow and people started to, develop their ideas. And eventually it sort of ended up in this kind of weird standoff thing. But I remember going out, though, to some of the early parties. And what occurred to me about the music was the fact that it was going straight from the head of the guy who'd produced it out of the speakers, whereas before you'd stand there with a guitar and a band and you'd have that kind of interface between you and the music and the people you're playing to. And it seemed to me that what you were getting then was the idea coming directly through the speakers.
Yeah.
And that really attracted me. I loved the idea that it was it was an electrical impulse and it was coming direct from the head of the guy who's thought what you could do, what he was going to do next. And also the fact that you didn't have that physical... I always thought it was great. What happened... A lot of people, it came in for a lot of stick, right? The early techno type scene, dance music when it came, because it wasn't being played. There was this kind of stigma about it. But the thing is, if you got it, if you understood it, and if you'd been out to a party, then obviously you didn't have a problem with it. And I never did. I always thought it was great. It didn't matter to me that there was not an instrument or a traditional instrument involved. It was like completely irrelevant as far as I was concerned. And I love the idea that you hear these ridiculously long snare rolls, for instance, going into the drop or whatever. And I was thinking, well, why not? All bets are off. You can do what you want.
Yeah.
And so that side of it really attracted me.
Yeah.
The fact that it just, the rules that you thought were rules were now no longer rules. You could do what you wanted. It was completely new. Like I say, that kick drum thing. Yeah. So I can remember thinking, well, there you go. I've been playing music all these years and all of a sudden this kick drum has popped out of nowhere. I thought that was just an extraordinary thing, really.
Yeah, amazing. And so alongside John Digweed, you guys together are obviously Bedrock. Can you tell us about how you first met John and how you first started working together?
Yeah, I was playing in a band and the saxophone player in the band used to go and play in Austria at the in the ski resorts there in the winter. That was one of the gigs that he had, my mate Sim, and he knew John because John would do that as well. Like I say, this is 89, 90 again. John would go to the ski resorts and do a bit of DJing, and he met Simeon, and basically Simeon introduced me to John. He said that he knew somebody that was starting to try and write in with computers and sequencers and samplers, and why didn't we meet up? And so sure enough, John turned up. But these sort of things happen all the time, but how was I to know that John was actually, serious as he was about doing stuff. So he came in. It's just another one of those things. Music, you hear it's such a cliche. You have to be at the right place at the right time. But I was just, like I say, in a position where I could start to make records seriously, do mixes. We had all the equipment, the facilities, we had big desks and all the gear. And John was serious about what he was doing. He'd just started doing stuff with Sasha, I think, at that point. So he had people interested in what he was doing. I had the facilities to do it. And the other thing about John and I is that our roles are very demarcated. He knows about DJing and records and mixing and beat matching, and I didn't know about any of that.
Yeah.
And so he was able to show me properly what it was that he needed a record to do in order to make a mix. Yeah. So it was just one of those, happy accidents. I had the musical background and knowledge and facilities, and he had the DJ nous know-how and knowing what he wanted. So we just started, and also because it was fairly early on in the scene.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know where it was going to go. I mean, I think John is just still amazed that he's here 30 years later, still gigging around the world. I think I can remember him telling me how he knew he only had a certain shelf life, and it would be about 3 or 4 years. And that was in 1991, So it was just one of those happy accidents, really. And so we did a couple of remixes, and then we did our first original tune, which was For What You Dream Of, which he grabbed with both hands and stuck it on the Renaissance Mix Collection right at the top. This is what you need to do. John is absolutely not bashful at all in promoting what he's doing and giving value to what he's doing. So he got the track and he featured it. And he featured it just at the right time, and that mix collection, Renaissance Mix Collection, was the first big mix collection, sold 100,000, and we were like, wow.
It's credited as the first live mix album that was ever created. Obviously, that's like up front, right on there. In terms of that track specifically, what was it's an absolute monster of progressive house. It is almost the archetypal progressive house tune. What was the kind of inspiration behind creating that? What was the process that you and John went through, and what inspired you to create it?
The main thing I remember about that is that we felt as if we had absolutely carte blanche to do anything we wanted to do. We knew we were making dance music. We knew it needed to work on the dance floor. And again, the fact that I've got the sort of rhythmic tendency when I make music, that helped with that. And also John knew it had to do certain things, right? But apart from that, we felt as if we could do anything that we wanted to, really. And so John would say, I don't know, try doing something with trumpets. And so I'd find some trumpets and bung them in, and then we'd say, well, we'll take it down there, we'll let that go for a little while, why not try something else? You see what I mean? We had nobody telling us what to do. We were making it up as we went along. We knew we wanted it to be long, fairly long track. We knew it wanted to be kind of a journey. Well, John certainly did. And then we were getting to the end of writing it, and he said, right, I want some vocals on there. And I'm like, you're kidding me. So we got in touch with Carol, who did the vocals, and ended up with that track. But like I say, we had complete free hand to do anything that we wanted, and that's what came out. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that we had. It wasn't as if we were trying to copy anything particularly. I mean, there were things that we were listening to that we liked, but and John would turn up with some records. This is how it would always work. He'd turn up with some tunes, and he said, well, I like the way that it does this. And so I'd listen to it and then try and recreate something. And in the grand old tradition, when you try and recreate something, it comes out a bit wrong or different anyway. Then he'd say, well, listen to the percussion on this. I really like the sound of that. So I'd try and do something which was a bit like that. And then you'd end up with the elements, and then it's a question of arranging them then. Yeah. Making sense of them, which we were able to do.
Amazing. And I mean, that track as well, it's been used it's to great effect in the clubbing scene in Train Spotting. Did you have any input in terms of that track being used in what is now like an iconic scene from an iconic film, or are you just proud that it's in there?
Just it's an honour, and it's really pleasing to know that you've been a part of something that's part of the enduring part of the cultural landscape. That's like, it's just one of those things. Don't want to pat yourself on the back too much, but again, it was a lucky thing when they told us that it was going to be used in a film, and that it was a British film. We didn't set very much store by that. Yeah. it's like, fine, nice idea, but of course, like, again, it turned out to be Train Spotting, and it's it's a decent film, and it's like I say, it made a particular point as well, and it's like a snapshot of what was going on then. And so obviously really pleased and proud to be a part of that. And it's one of those things that's defined us for a few years and helped put Bedrock on the map. I mean, it was a party, Bedrock, that I think originally Bedrock was a club in Chicago. And I think that's where John borrowed the name from. And he did his own Bedrock nights. But of course, when that track came out and got used in the film, then it kind of it gave him something that he could use to post up everywhere, and got the name around, and people were familiar with the name of Bedrock, and so it sort of took it to the next level, really. So that was great.
Awesome. Another track as Bedrock you produced is Heaven Sent in 1999. Just to cover off that, I remember hearing that everywhere that year, played by all kinds of different DJs as well, which was kind of surprising. You had this era where it was kind of like the trance scene and progressive house, and it's almost a little bit fragmented, but it had that real crossover appeal. It's still an absolute anthem, and it's had numerous remixes over the years. When you produced that track, did you set out at the time to make something with such longevity or anthematic status, or was it just another track that you've made and you're kind of happy with, and it escapes out into the world and becomes this beast?
Well, we're trying to make big tracks, It's like John and I. That's the other thing, is that we've got very coincidental ideas about music and the way that we want music to sound. Thing is, it's we like rocking music, and the rock element of what we do is it's always been bubbling under the surface a bit. John's like real big fan of New Order and that type of sound, the electro thing. He also used to play, those kind of indie type remixes that you get of people like Simple Minds and that kind of thing. So he always liked his rock music, not heavy rock or anything, but that type of British type of independent rock sound and remixes thereof. He was always drawn towards that. And I had, I'd been involved in that scene a bit myself. So the rock element of what we do is kind of in there. And we're trying to, when we make tracks, we want to try and give the crowd a lift, and we don't like it to be too dreamy. So Heaven Sent, we wanted to make a big sounding track. I don't even know if we spoke about it really, Matt, to be honest. I think we were just doing what we wanted to do, and I would play him some ideas. Heaven Sent was one. That big riff that's in Heaven Sent, I remember what I did. It's always the same when you're making tracks. If you take it over the top, then that's normally right. That's how it seemed to work for us. But Heaven Sent's got that big tune, that big melody in it, and I remember layering it with different sounds and sampling that, and then putting another synth on top of that, and then just making it sound as big as I possibly could. And then, like you say, you go past a certain point, and it starts to sound like something. And he'll hate me for saying this. I remember John saying it's bigger than For an Angel. He said For an Angel was
Paul Van Dyke. Yeah.
Now, of course, Paul Van Dyke and what Bedrock do have kind of parted ways a long time ago. But at the time, Paul was just coming up, and he was making a lot of impression. And I think John was quite pleased that we'd come up with something that in his mind would compete with that. And also the thing that happened at that time was we'd got a deal with Pioneer to run the label as part of Pioneer Records, and this was the first track for that deal. So it was the first time that Bedrock record label had released a track, and we wanted something to sort of kick it off as in the right way as we could, and came up with Heaven Sent. Like I say, I don't know if how planned it was, but it's just, let's try and make a decent record. And we came up with Heaven Sent. I can't listen to it now, man. It's so fast.
It's so fast. It's so fast.
It kind of feels a bit uncomfortable listening to it, because what happens, seems to me, I've kept track of this over the years. When we started making music, this type of music, we were down around about 121 beats per minute. That felt okay. And then I remember the tempo that everybody was working at just gradually rose and rose and rose towards the millennium. And like I say, then we were at 125 for about 2 years, and then we were at 127 for another couple of years, then up to 130, and I think Heaven Sent is 132. And it's like, well, plenty of music at 132 now, but not in the style that we do. It's that, that trancey type thing, the T word. But then after the millennium, I don't know if that's anything to do with it, I suspect not, but after the millennium, things seem to just calm down and go back down to about 125 again. We worked at for quite a few years, around about there, and now 122, 123, so it's almost like this elliptical curve over the last 25, 30 years. We've gone from, we're back where we started at tempo-wise. It's a funny thing that if you get the energy right or the intensity right in the record, it seems to me you don't need to, the energy's all there.
Yeah.
And if you're putting that amount of energy into a track and you're running it 130, 135, although people do it, but to me it just sounds like it's trying too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It loses the groove a bit, It's like you've got enough energy because the sounds that we're using now, everything's so up front, but you've still got a little bit of something that makes you lock in to it, when you're listening.
There are still tracks I hear now, new tracks that when I look at the BPM of them, I'm surprised at, actually that's quite slow. It's actually sometimes surprising, like you say, if it's got a good groove and there's a lot going on, it doesn't really matter what BPM it is. Yeah.
There is something, time is a funny beast. It's like you can be, if you've got a bunch of people out in front of you going mad and you're playing some quite intense tracks, sometimes you look down and you're like, oh, really? I'm still at 121, and you couldn't possibly think of going any quicker than that because you just lose the momentum of it. So, funny old thing. Time's definitely relative, like they say.
So you as an individual as well, Nick, you do a lot of remix work, officially and unofficially. I did catch your edit remix of Wolf Alice, Don't Delete the Kisses, which cool. Was, I love that original track anyway. Yeah. And when it kind of came out on SoundCloud, you'd done a re-edit, a remix of it. I was like, wow, this is like taking a track that I love and someone I really respect as a producer, and it's really good. But yeah, it's in terms of that context, when you hear something that you like, for instance, that track, is there always the temptation to take it and put your own spin on it, or how does that come about in terms of you choosing what tunes you remix?
Well, that track in particular, Don't Delete the Kisses, it had that little synth loopy roundy riff, which I really liked. I guess you heard it too.
Totally.
It's that sound, and it's got that regular thing.
Yeah.
So there's that. And it's something you hear and you just think to yourself, I'd really like to hear that in a dance mix, so I better do it then, And the other thing is that sometimes they, I think Wolf Alice are a pretty cool band, really, and they've got that thing that makes them cool, and you want to be a part of that, or you want to flag that up. Firstly, is the fact that you want to hear something in a dance context. And secondly, it's something that deserves to have it done, and that you might be able to introduce other people to something that they didn't necessarily know that they might like. All that. This just, it's just stuff that you like, good stuff that you want to translate to a dance floor. It's amusing, entertaining.
And you've remixed some classics. I'm thinking of things as Bedrock, Underworld's Cowgirl. You've done a remix yourself of Orbital's Chime, Bedrock mix of New Order, Blue Monday. These are all absolutely titanic tunes of the genre. Does it ever worry you when you want to take on a classic like that and remix it? Are you ever scared of the thing you've got to scale, or is it a challenge?
You want to do it justice. I understand what you're saying. Cowgirl. Yes, okay. Thing is, Cowgirl is. Well, for both of us, John and I, that is that's a classic dance track, and it's got, I remember being there 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, all sorts of states, somebody dropping that for the first time and just thinking, doesn't get much better than this. That track in particular, I was thinking, well, what the hell are we doing remixing this? Why would we even bother, you know? The thing is, John was a massive Underworld fan back in the day. I mean, he still likes Underworld, but when Darren was playing with him, then, you know, he always really admired what they did and the fact that they'd become a band and brought dance music into that kind of arena. They didn't, you know, what they did was very clever and very and difficult, and was never likely to happen, and except for the fact that it did. That's another story. But anyway, John really wanted to do an Underworld remix and finally managed to get the parts for Cowgirl, and we did our mix for it. I remember a little story about that. Norman Cook did his Big Beat Boutique?
Big Beat Boutique.
And he did that on the beach in Brighton.
It was the Big Beach Boutique, I think.
That's it. And John played, and there was, you know, whatever it was, a lot of people on the front of Brighton. And I remember we drove down, and it was such a weird day. I mean, there was all sorts of people all over the roads, but I was with some friends, and we drove right to the front and got into the car park. And I was thinking, well, how are we even getting into the car? I remember somebody waving to us, saying, "There's a spot over here," you know, just normal car park, and that person was Chris Moyles, who was the BBC the breakfast show presenter at the time, and I think this is odd. So he was directing us into our car parking spot, and then got out of the car and walked towards the beach. John was playing, and I got onto the beach right at the back of the crowd. I started making my way forward, and at that point he dropped that Cowgirl remix, and so I was going right through the crowd up to the stage to get on the stage just to say hello, have a drink or whatever, but listening to our remix as I was doing it, and that was a surreal experience. Perks of the job, Matt, you know, that sort of stuff. Don't necessarily earn you any money but it's just a wild thing. And I remember thinking that the mix was all right, actually. Worked, you know.
I remember hearing that in... I used to go to Renaissance in Nottingham a lot, and hearing that in there on that Steve Dash sound system was always a pleasure.
Listening to most things on a Steve Dash system.
So in terms of yourself, do you see yourself as you play as a DJ as well around the world? Do you see yourself as a producer first, then a DJ, or...?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I really do. The way things have gone is a bit peculiar, really. Now, I've been DJing now for a while. Best part of 10 years now, and I actually kind of feel as if I'm getting a bit better at it. And I kind of know a bit better what to do now. I mean, I do what John does, really. I construct a set in the way that John constructs a set. We like to build the thing, and we like to get the momentum going. The subtle things that people miss. I can remember going to see John play at Club UK, which was in Wandsworth, about 94, 95 maybe. But I can remember going, and I stood behind him and it was a funny little dance floor. I don't even think he was in the main room. Just this kind of circular dance floor with a few people, just a decent sized crowd. But I stood right behind him and listened to the 2-hour set without him knowing that I was there. I just wanted to listen. I didn't want to socialise particularly, and didn't want to interfere with his concentration. I just wanted to hear what he was doing. And I remember thinking the way that he set up the trance, meaning the hypnotic thing that he does, and the way that what he was specifically doing was trying to get that thing rolling along between records and making it so that you didn't notice the transition. All you noticed was the fact that the thing was moving along really well and took you with it. That was the idea. And I was still learning about this stuff at that point. Even then, you see, the amazing thing about him is he's always known this is what he wants to do. Ever since he was a teenager and playing, he understood that the thing to do is you need to try and set up that hypnotic groove, and that's what he wanted to do, and that it was possible to do this, and also that it is a sound. It's a sound. He's playing a sound. He's not necessarily... It's the records are kind of... obviously, they're important. But the amazing thing about John is that you can hear him play a record, and for some reason it sounds different when somebody else plays it. Because of the context. And it's because it's him, and because you've got confidence in what he's doing, and you know that he knows what he's doing. And so he can take a bunch of records which by themselves sound fairly normal and make them into something which sounds great, simply because of the way that he moves through them and the choices of what he puts next to each other. And I've got the hang of that now a little bit more. I love the idea that what you're doing is trying to play a sound rather than, it's not so much about the individual records, although of course they're still important.
They're all parts of a big whole.
Yeah.
The whole just being a vibe and a sound, like you say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And he's had this peculiar vision of it since as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
He's always known where I was sort of kind of fishing around and doing a bit of this and doing a bit of that, and I like the sound of this and I like the sound of that. But he always had a very particular vision of how he wanted it to go.
Yeah.
And of course he's taken it and spread it worldwide and done really well with it. It's admirable, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't, as a musician, especially somebody in my position, you don't necessarily meet somebody who you feel as if you have that kind of vibe with. It's not a given if you're a musician. But you happen to come across somebody who's got a really valid idea which you can understand and translate and help. That's been a really nice thing,
Yeah.
and that's why we've lasted as long as we have. Because if he's talking about music or doing some music, then I can normally understand what he's on about, and that I've not always found that to be the case. He can say in a very few words what he doesn't like about a track, and I always know what he means. Like, it sounds a bit too clunky here, or it sounds a bit too is a word he often uses. If he says that, I know I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I suppose it's like an actor working with a director, isn't it? You get
Exactly.
these people that have had those partnerships, and it just becomes a shorthand working with each other in that way.
Well, yeah, I'd definitely say that his directing, I'm not sure if I'm an actor so much.
The producer.
Right, but his directing skills are, I would say, certainly as far as I'm concerned, really on the money.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that point where you were hearing your remix of Underworld and you were in the crowd. Is there ever the temptation to play much of your own stuff in your own sets, or do you try to avoid that, or are you road testing things, or how do you kind of build those, what you play?
That's a good question. The thing is, you necessarily have a different relationship with track that you've made to the rest of the stuff. And I know more than one DJ, myself included, that the temptation is to avoid playing your own tracks because you're a bit too worried about it, and it's your track, and is it having the right effect, and oh my god, I've broken it, and it's me, and it's because I'm not. You have that bit of self-doubt about stuff that you've written because you're totally responsible for it, but you have to get over that. I think you have to play what you've made. I think it's your duty to do it, and I think if you're halfway decent, then it'll be okay. And I did used to find it uncomfortable, but I'm better at it now.
Yeah.
I think if you can play a few of your own tracks, then I think you should do it, and I think people like to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like DJing though, and I like listening to DJs, and one of the things I like about DJs is the fact that they play records that come from different sources. If you do this live set thing, which I've done a bit of, then the idea is that it's all your stuff.
Yeah.
And for my personal taste, I think you lose something from the entertainment if you're not picking stuff which has come from various different sources. It's one of the great things about DJing, isn't it? You can play a track from Turkey, followed by a track from India, followed by a track from the States.
Spontaneously as well, just the time's right for this one. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
That's right. I love the fact that it's a collaborative effort and you knit the thing together yourself.
We've been talking for a while. I don't want to keep you. However, but what we normally do is we ask all of our guests to submit 5 tracks to our perfect playlist, which we're trying to build on Spotify. So based around 5 themes, you've been really helpful and responded to us and given us the tracks, your choices. I just want to get like a little kind of pen portrait of your experience with each one of these tracks as we go through. So we always ask, what was the catalyst, the one track that first got you into dance music? And you've chosen Express 2's London Express. Can you just cast your mind back to why have you chosen that, and when was the first time you heard it? What affected that?
Well, I remember distinctly that particular track. The thing is, if you say what tracks got you into dance music, then of course it's difficult because it was probably stuff that I didn't know what the hell it was. And I was out in a party and but what I can remember what happened was that people started to specifically go to see DJs, and then that was a new idea in the late 80s. early 90s. It was like you go and see a band, but it's like a DJ was somebody who played in a nightclub or whatever, Sinatra's. But then I think the first DJ I specifically went to see was Danny Rampling. But I was at Bagley's one night, and a bit worse for wear, and I can remember London Express coming on, and the way that track sounded, I was standing at the back yelling at the top of my voice, classic and all this, because I was a bit fucked, But that track, I still think it's great. It's the way the bass works. Rocky and Diesel, that is Express 2, unless I'm very much mistaken. They again, they're not, these people are not necessarily trained musicians or anything, but they knew what worked. And you listen to the bass line of that track, it's kind of in the right sort of key, but that's not what it's about. It's the sound that the bloody thing makes. And that bass line with those cowbells and the way that the drop works and the way they get that build up happening and then the bass comes back in again, it was like nothing I'd heard before. And 3:30 in the morning at Bagley's when you're worse for wear in 1991 or whatever it was a great moment for me. So carry that one forward.
Yeah, a real catalyst.
Yeah, it was.
And in terms of a floor filler, chosen your own remix of Orbital's Chime, I suppose, as we kind of alluded to earlier. How do you approach, how did you approach remixing that? It's a stone cold classic.
Well, you were talking yourself about doing a bit of re-editing, and what we like to do, one of the things that we did in our productions, John and I, when we were starting, and he used to impress this upon me, is the idea would be tease stuff out, don't give the game away too quick, that kind of thing. So what you're trying to do, and you can hear this in DJing sets, is just get that energy and work with it. And that's how I approached that mix. I wanted it something that was a bit longer, a bit more drawn out, but of course the payoff with that track is so great when the riffs eventually come in, that you can really give it a proper billing. Now of course they didn't necessarily do that, Orbital, when they wrote the track, because it was their track and it was a new track, and it wasn't an anthem when they wrote it because they'd just written it. But after having listened to the track, and there was that classic thing where they played at Glastonbury and they got the levels wrong and did this huge exposition of that riff, and I was thinking to myself, well, let's just kind of build that into a mix. And also people have good associations with the track, so it's a bit of a cheap shot if you're going to be lacing your set with tracks like that, but as something to just make the party rock even more and just get the mood up a notch. If I drop that mix, then I find that people are definitely on your side by that time. You don't want to give the game away too quick, as I say, but if you've worked with it for a little while and then, or at the end or something like that, you want to give some people something to go away with and feel good about. So that was the idea behind that one.
We always ask for a sunsetter. You've chosen FC Kahuna's Hailing.
You know that track?
It's the vocal, the dreamy vocal, the kind of almost backwards sounding intro.
Well, look, the reason I've chosen that is because it came to mind. We have done a remix of it. I don't know what's happening with the remix, but we've done one. It's ages ago now, last year, and I guess they're waiting for the right moment to put that out again. But working on it like that with the stems and the samples and listening to it, and you realise, oh right, okay, this is, I knew the track anyway. I mean, most people who are into the scene would know, they'd recognise it, but listening to it a bit more closely and working with it made me realise that it's actually a bit of a classic, really. Just the atmosphere, it's not too sentimental, but it's at the same time emotional, and it's engaging, and the energy is there, even though it's not an intense energy. It's a really nicely judged track, and above all, it's atmospheric. It has all that in spades. So I figure that you could play that as you're watching the sun do its thing in outside Mambo, and it would be a nice moment.
Totally. I remember the first time I heard it, I remember Pete Tong playing it on the Essential Selection, and he actually introduced it as, this is completely different, it's something that maybe I wouldn't normally play, just check this out. And I remember it just stopping me in my tracks. It's beautiful. Like you say, that weird backwards sample. When you're producing, a lot of what producing is about really is the decisions you make. And you often listen to
something and you wonder why the hell somebody chose what they did, and you can't think why they would choose a sound like that, but it just works so brilliantly well.
Yeah.
And I really admire that. If somebody makes a decision which at first seems an odd one, but then after repeated listening you realise that it's, the perfect choice.
Yeah.
That's what producing's all about, really.
Yeah, so recognisable as well.
That's
really,
right.
Yeah. And a tearjerker, whether it be dance music or otherwise, Gavin Bryar's Jesus Blood Never Failed Me Yet. I did find this on Spotify and I found it was 28 minutes long.
Yeah.
I did listen to it. It's incredible. It's haunting.
It's really one of those goose pimply tracks. So what that is a recording of a Down and Out Tramp. Years ago, I don't know when that recording would have been made, 50s or 60s, and the story of it is it's a tramp, hobo guy in England, somebody who's going around recording stuff, and they recorded this old boy singing this song, Jesus Blood Never Failed Me Yet. And what happened was he got it back to the cutting room, the editing room, and had it on a tape loop, and it was just looping round just because somebody had left it looping round, and he'd noticed that people were starting to sob when they heard this old boy singing this little song. Now, there's something about the fact that he is a down and out and life has treated him unkindly, and he's still singing this song about how things are really all right because Jesus loves me. And there's just something, so it's very sad. And from this simple little voice, he does this amazing string arrangement which grows around the voice and takes it into an entirely new sphere. And like you say, it's 28 minutes long, 28 minutes of that little, whatever it is, 16-bar loop of that old boy singing. But then this incredible string arrangement which just takes it, gives it wings and makes it fly as an idea.
Yeah.
And that's a truly emotional piece of music.
Okay, well, I mean, we can move on to the last tune. It's the end of the night. The crowd are asking for one more. You've chosen Rhythm is Rhythm, Strings of Life. Perfect to end on.
Yeah, and well, as I said to you before, I did a rework of that again because it's you listen to that now, and there's so much, it carries so much weight, that record, because it just sounds like the story of this music, really. The idea of the riff when it comes in, the piano riff, the way that piano riff is constructed, and it's unusual, it's emotional without being sentimental, it's real feel-good track, very recognisable and unusual, but at the same time just really works. And it's an American sound, but that has translated across all nations and barriers, it seems to me. Also all genres as well. You can hear techno DJs play it, progressive DJs play it, and all shades in between, and it always works. And like I say, I did a problem with the track, playing a track that is 30 years old, 25, 30 years old, like that. The production values were slightly different then, and I would have trouble shoehorning that into a set of contemporary tunes.
Yeah, it sounds really lightweight when you hear it now, almost.
Yeah, I mean, it has its, it's got its own charm and it sounds great.
Yeah.
But next to a lot of the tracks that I would play, I wouldn't feel confident about playing the original version.
Yeah.
John, on the other hand, would just play the original version, although he's played the edit I've done a bunch of times. And it does work. It's got the power. That's the thing. That's what we're kind of known for doing, is this kind of rolling, powerful sort of sound. And so I did a version which makes Strings of Life do that a little bit more. But man, it's as classic as they come.
Yeah. I remember seeing a documentary, and Derek May said that he created that riff or the production in it in the sampler sequencer that he was using, and he listened to it back and he had to almost turn it off and put it in a different room, and because he was so frightened of it almost, and come back to it the next day and be like,
so what have I done?
What have I created? Yeah. And it's it's amazing that sometimes you come back to it the next day and it'd be absolute rubbish. But to know the power of it at that instantly almost.
Yeah, and that you've done something that works. Must do a few more of those myself.
Okay, so just one more question. We always ask our guests as well. Obviously, we are House Culture. This whole scene that's been created that you've had a hand in moving forward and pushing on, both yourself with John as Bedrock. What does this whole culture and scene kind of mean to you as a whole?
See, the thing is, it's it's more than a way of life to me, really. It's kind of more, it's who I am, because of what my relationship to that music and what I went through as we were making that music, and my own sort of private thoughts about it. It's a really interesting question to think about what might happen, how long that sound might be relevant, and I have no idea. One thing I do think about it is that it's been oppressed, really. It's been sat on, and part of the history of this music was that it was made illegal at one point. Now, the Criminal Justice Act and all the rest of it, repetitive beats.
Yeah.
Now that's extraordinary, and I presume that's one reason why it's lasted as long as it has, although I don't think it is the main reason, because I think the idea of standing all night listening to that music, it does take you somewhere. I don't want to get too weird and wonderful about it, but the thing is, it will definitely take you out of yourself, and it definitely gives you a chance to forget about your daily troubles, and that's what I think people really liked about it back in the day, and think they probably still do now, is the fact that you can the feeling. You go out dancing all night, and then you get out of the club and you think, where have I just been? You get taken somewhere, and I think that is a real thing. I don't think that that's some kind of imaginary sort of just semi-dream type state. I think it's it gives you the opportunity to get out of yourself, and I think there's a lot of mileage in what that is, but at the same time remembering that what we're doing here is a form of entertainment, but that can be as entertaining as the next thing. So like I say, for me it's more of a way of life, and it has this sort of addictive quality to it, house music, which is I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it's definitely there. And I listen to other types of music, but the thing is, what dance music is, that's the main event as far as I'm concerned, and it means a lot to me. I don't know whether it means the same to somebody who's 20. The hip hop thing is really big in our culture now, and I know a lot of younger guys who that's what they're kind of into, and it has this punk thing about it, the hip hop thing, and people expressing themselves in a lyrical way, which is not quite the same as dance music. Whether that means that has supplanted dance music, I don't know, don't really think so. But people who went through the 90s, the mid-90s, I think dance music means something to them that it might not to somebody who didn't experience it then. But I don't know that, and I'm not 100% sure that's true either, because I know a lot of younger people who live for this music and love it. So something different might happen, and it always does, it always has done, and it's always been technology led, so we'll see. But I knew at the time that this music was coming through, and what the sequencer was doing, what the computer was doing with it, the fact that it took over the job of what time was. It took that away, your responsibility for holding that down, and kept that groove going. That was a big one. I knew that was a big change, and it's definitely still rocking away. So, it's like I said, it's a sound, and I'm still trying to get it right. I'm still got ideas about putting a sound system up somewhere and doing it and making it sound, because I think if you see it under the right circumstances, you hear it under the right circumstances, then it's something else. The underground aspect of it, you can hear it on the radio, okay? But then you go to a club and you hear it on a system, under certain circumstances. That's why it's underground, because it works on two levels. There's the overground part of it, and then there's the underground, which you can only ever hear if you go out and experience it. And I don't know, that's a powerful thing as far as I'm concerned. So I'm in it for life, which won't be long.
I think that's the perfect place to end it on. That's brilliant. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you so much.
Nice one, mate. Cool.
House culture.
That was great stuff, wasn't it? What a thoroughly nice chap Nick is, and I can't thank him enough for welcoming me into his studio to chat all things music. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. There were a lot of tracks mentioned in that chat though, some of which aren't available on Spotify. So if you want to hear Bedrock's debut track For What You Dream Of, Nick's own remix of Orbital's Chime, or the Bedrock remix of Underworld's Cowgirl, you can find all of those on YouTube. Unfortunately, his own remix of Rhythm Is Rhythm, Strings of Life is unreleased, so you might just have to see him play live to hear that one. However, the tracks we discussed that are on Spotify can all be found on the House Culture Perfect playlist. These are London Express by Express 2, The original versions of Orbital's Chime and Rhythm is Rhythm Strings of Life, as well as the beautiful Hailing by FC Kahuna, which I cannot wait to hear what the Bedrock remix of that sounds like. Nick said they've done one, keep your eyes open for that release. But if you want to hear Nick's tearjerker choice, Gavin Bryar's Jesus Blood Never Failed Me Yet, I'll just recommend immersing yourself in the full 28-minute version of that that's on Spotify. That has left a place open on our playlist though, so I've chucked in that Bedrock classic Heaven Sent. So I'll say it again, you can check all of these tracks out and more on House Culture's perfect playlist on Spotify. Search for it, follow it, so not only will you not miss out on the choices from our podcast guests, you'll also get a regularly updated selection of beats that cover every facet of dance music. Once you're done there, please support us by subscribing, loving, liking, tweeting, sharing, and not forgetting to leave us a review. It would always get you a shout out on a future episode. This time around, a huge shout out to the self-titled crazy uncle of house culture. Instagram's at I'm Instaboggle, real name Phil. He got in touch to tell us how amazing he thought our last episode with Greg Wilson was, and he totally agrees with Greg's outlook on how important it is to bridge the gap between the old and the young using the biggest beats of the day. Thank you so much for getting in touch, Phil. We at House Culture hope we can continue to keep our extended family all happy. And if you've got this far into the podcast and still don't know what House Culture is all about, we are a collective of house music fans who have come together through their mutual love of the beat to celebrate the spirit of house music. And what better way to celebrate with us than by hitting up our Instagram feed at HouseCultureNet or by following the hashtag #TrueHouseCulture. And finally, you can reach out to me, Matt Rouse, directly on Instagram at DJ Matt Rouse. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
House Culture.